In this video, I gave myself only one rule, and that I had to make a full song using only this kick drum that I found on Cymatics. I'm not even sure if it was from Cymatics, it's just a random kick sample that I found somewhere, but either way, I gave myself a challenge that I have to make a full song with only using this one single sample. Some basic rules that I put out for myself was I was able to use samplers and effects like reverbs, delays, distortions, but I wasn't allowed to use anything else other than this kick. That includes no using of synthesizers, no using of other samples, anything, just this sample. So what I did to start off is pretty simple. All I wanted to do was make a pretty simple drum beat, and this actually ended up not being as easy as what I thought it would be. It actually took quite a lot of time to try and manipulate the sounds and everything. So starting off pretty simple, I obviously used the kick for the actual kick drum. I added a bit of saturation with the Cymatics Diablo plugin. It's actually a really good plugin for distorting drums and everything. Then for the snare, this was actually quite hard to make sound good. I ended up basically just distorting the hell out of it and then EQing out the lows, adding some saturation, reverb and everything. And then I pitched it up a bit so that it wouldn't have that sort of bassy kicky sound, and I wanted a bit more mid-range to it. So after a bit of pitching up and a bit of effects and everything, it ended up sounding like this. So next up was the hi-hats, and obviously trying to make hi-hats from something like a kick drum was quite difficult, but basically all I did was EQ out a ton of low ends. I pitched it up a bit and then adjusted the envelope of the actual sound to make it sort of a plucky shape, and then I added this delay shimmer from Valhalla Supermassive, which is a very cool free delay plugin which gave it quite a cool metallic-y texture sort of. So these are just all the drums. They're pretty simple. I only had a basic kick, a snare and a hi-hat, and some little percussion stabs here and there. That was just from warping the kick sample, nothing too special. But yeah, so they all sound like this together. So next up was the bass. The actual bass was quite difficult to get to sound good. I ended up putting the actual kick drum into a little sampler which is called the Simpler in Ableton, and basically all I did was zoom right into the sample here to find this little sort of waveform which had this bassy kind of square wave, saw wave sound to it. Then I put it on loop mode so that it would constantly loop between this little tiny section that I chalked out for it. This makes it just sustain like a normal key, like on a synthesizer. When you press it down, it will just play a normal sustained note. Then I adjusted some of the amplitude settings like the ADSR ratio and stuff like that, and then I ended up making it sound like this. So not great, but after I added some effects such as OTT and some compression and this decapitator for some saturation, it sounded like this. So you'll notice the little wobble in the bass there, that's actually an auto filter I automated, and I made the filter sort of rise up and down to create the wobble effect, and that sounds like this. So making good progress. Now we're onto the synths. These synths were actually really annoying to make because it was so difficult to make them actually sound interesting and unique. So what I did was I did the same thing with the bass. I added the kick drum to a simpler, and then I found a little part in the sample that resembled a square wave sort of. I did the same thing as the bass. I looped it and then added another layer of the same thing but an octave down to get more spread. I then basically just added like a bunch of effects, including this auto filter automation to make a sort of wobble on the synth itself, like what I did with the bass. And then I added these kickstarts, which actually made some pretty cool LFO shapes. So they're sort of stuttering and starting here and there. So this is what they sound like. I also took this synth and I made another sort of version of it for the middle section to add some variation. I adjusted the ADSR envelope to make it this sort of plucky sound, and I added a lot of reverb to get it all washed out, and it sounds like this. Another variation that I used for this synth was actually in the second drop section, where I basically just added an LFO tool at a high rate and made them real glitchy and washed them out with reverb, so that sounds like this. And it's kind of funny because I don't actually have LFO tool purchased, so I'm literally just using the demo version and I'm recording it to audio, so that's why it's here bounced into audio instead of on the actual track itself. So now we're moving on to leads. Let's look at the first lead we have. So basically I did the same thing, and I used a sampler for the kick until I found some wave shapes that I thought were good and that I could use for my leads. Then I just applied basically a ton of effects because the standard square wave or the standard tone was pretty boring in itself. And one of the main elements of the sound design is actually this delay here, and I've talked about this one in other videos that I've done, but delay is actually really good for making some pretty cool sound design tricks. And for this one here I actually automated the times to get some different sounds and textures here. With the main two leads, I did pretty much the same thing. Like I grabbed a simpler and found this other weird waveform which kind of looks like a U shape. But then again I adjusted the envelope to this plucky shape and added a ton of effects like distortion, OTT, reverb, and this kickstart again, which is adjusting the LFO rate in eighth notes. So it's creating that sort of pulsing rhythm again, which sounds like this. I then layered this with this lead here, which stands out a bit more, and I did the same. I found a little shape in the sample and added reverb and distortion, and this sounds a lot more brighter and clearer like this. For the next section, I took the same lead and I actually made a new melody. And this time I used an LFO tool to get this weird swing rhythm, And again, I don't have the full version, so I had to again record this to audio. For the intro, I just basically recorded the entire track to an audio file, and then I put it through this granular synthesizer called Quanta, and then I got some weird intro which started off like this. And yeah, that's basically it really. It was really cool to try and make something out of just a simple drum one shot. It still is a really good way to test out my production skills and try and get creative. And I want to encourage you guys to set yourself boundaries and challenges when you create, as by having boundaries and stuff, it really gets you thinking creatively and lets you experiment with different sounds and everything else.